Karen refused CPR from a black medic. Nearly died, he saved her anyway. The annual charity gala for the Metropolitan Opera was in full swing. The venue, a sprawling gilded ballroom, thrummed with the energy of New York City's elite. Champagne flutes clinked, designer gowns shimmered under the crystal chandeliers, and the air crackled with the kind of self-important chatter that only the truly wealthy can muster. Karen was, as always, at the center of it all. She was a vision in a crimson Valentino, her surgically enhanced features arranged in a practiced smile. She moved through the crowd like a predatory swan, her eyes scanning for anyone important enough to warrant her attention. She was a force of nature, or so she believed, a whirlwind of entitlement, privilege, and thinly veiled disdain for anyone she deemed beneath her. Tonight, however, fate, in its infinite irony, had other plans for Karen. The orchestra swelled as the evening's program began, a dramatic aria that filled the vast space. Karen, never one to be truly moved by anything other than her own reflection, found herself growing restless. She excused herself from her group, a gaggle of socialites who hung on her every word, and made her way towards the bar. The room was crowded, the music loud, and the press of bodies began to feel oppressive. Suddenly, Karen felt a sharp pain in her chest. It was like a vice tightening with each passing second, stealing her breath. She gasped, clutching at her dress, her face contorting in pain. The room began to spin, the glittering chandeliers blurring into a dizzying kaleidoscope of light. She stumbled, knocking into a waiter who spilled a tray of champagne flutes. The sound of shattering glass was swallowed by the music, but a few people turned to stare. Karen, her vision tunneling, collapsed onto the marble floor. Chaos erupted. The music faltered, the crowd parted, and a wave of panicked murmurs filled the room. People gasped, pointed, and fumbled for their phones. No one seemed to know what to do, except for him. Dr. Jamal Thompson was an emergency room physician at Harlem General, moonlighting as a paramedic for special events to make some extra cash. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet intensity that commanded respect. He had seen it all in the ER, the gunshot wounds, the overdoses, the heart attacks. He was trained to handle any medical crisis with cool efficiency and unwavering focus. Tonight, he was stationed near the back of the ballroom, a silent guardian amidst the revelry. When he saw Karen collapse, he didn't hesitate. He moved through the crowd with a purpose that cut through the panic, his medical bag in hand. He knelt beside Karen, his expression grim. Her pulse was weak, her breathing shallow. He knew immediately that she was in cardiac arrest. She needed CPR, and she needed it now. "I'm a doctor," he announced, his voice clear and authoritative. "She needs CPR. Someone call 911. A few people stared, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. No one moved. They were waiting for someone else to take charge. Someone who looked like they belonged in this world of privilege and power. Someone like Karen. Jamal didn't have time for this. Every second counted. He positioned Karen on her back, tilted her head, and pinched her nose. He was about to begin rescue breaths when he heard a weak but firm voice. "No!" Jamal stopped, his eyes meeting Karen's. Her face was pale, slick with sweat, but her eyes were open, and they were filled with a defiant, almost desperate look. "No," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't touch me." Jamal frowned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This woman was dying, and she was refusing his help? He had encountered patients who were combative, delirious, or simply afraid, but he had never encountered anything like this. "Ma'am, you're in cardiac arrest," he said, his voice firm but patient. "I need to perform CPR. If I don't, you will die." Karen's eyes flickered with a strange mix of pain and disgust. "I know who you are," she gasped, her voice weak and raspy. "You're the help." Jamal's jaw tightened. He knew what she meant. She wasn't referring to his role as a doctor. She was referring to his race. He had encountered this kind of prejudice before. The subtle dismissals, the casual assumptions, the ingrained belief that some people were simply less worthy of respect. He had learned to navigate these situations with a mixture of grace and firmness. But tonight, with a woman's life hanging in the balance, He didn't have time for this. "Ma'am, I don't care who you think I am," he said, his voice hard. "I am a doctor, and I am here to save your life. Now please let me do my job." Karen's eyes narrowed. I want a real doctor," she whispered, her voice fading. Jamal stared at her, incredulous. "I am a real doctor," he said, his voice rising in frustration. "I have years of training. I have saved countless lives, and I am trying to save yours right now. But if you refuse my help, there is nothing I can do." He glanced around at the crowd. People were staring, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. No one intervened. No one spoke up. They were content to watch this woman die rather than challenge her prejudice. Jamal felt a surge of anger, a burning resentment at the injustice of it all. This woman, this entitled, privileged woman, was willing to die rather than be touched by him. It was a level of arrogance, a level of self-destruction that he found both appalling and heartbreaking. But he was a doctor, and doctors didn't give up on their patients no matter how difficult, no matter how misguided. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He had to find a way to reach her, to break through the wall of her prejudice, to convince her that her life was worth more than her bigotry. He leaned closer to her, his voice low and urgent. "Ms. Karen," he said, using her name for the first time, "I know you're scared. I know you're confused. But you need to trust me. I can save you. But you have to let me try. Please." He saw a flicker of something in her eyes, a moment of doubt, a crack in her armor of self-righteousness. She was still clinging to her prejudice, but she was also beginning to realize the gravity of her situation. She was facing death, and death was a great equalizer. "Please," Jamal repeated, his voice pleading now, "don't let your pride kill you." The word pride seemed to resonate with Karen. It was a word she understood, a word she lived by. But in this moment, it took on a different meaning. It wasn't a source of strength, it was a fatal flaw. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She was weak, she was vulnerable, and she was terrified. She knew deep down that she had no other choice. With a trembling hand, she reached out and touched Jamal's arm. It was a small gesture, but it was a monumental surrender. It was an admission that she was wrong, that she was human, that she was in his hands. Jamal felt a surge of relief. He had broken through. He had reached her. He didn't waste another second. He positioned his hands on her chest and began compressions. Hard and fast, rhythmically pushing on her sternum, forcing her heart to pump. He breathed into her mouth, giving her the breath of life. He was focused, determined, his every move precise and efficient. The room was silent now, all eyes fixed on the drama unfolding on the floor. The music had stopped. The chatter had ceased, and the only sound was the rhythmic thump of Jamal's compressions and the whoosh of his breaths. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Jamal continued his work, his muscles aching, his mind racing. He refused to give up. He refused to let this woman die. And then finally a miracle, a faint flutter beneath his fingertips, a weak cough. Karen's eyes fluttered open, her gaze unfocused and disoriented. "She's back," Jamal announced, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and relief. "She has a pulse." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. People gasped, applauded, and wiped away tears. They had witnessed a life saved, a prejudice overcome, a moment of profound human connection. Paramedics arrived, their sirens wailing in the distance. They took over from Jamal, stabilizing Karen and preparing her for transport to the hospital. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Karen's eyes met Jamal's. Her expression was no longer defiant or disgusted. It was grateful and something else, shame. Jamal nodded, his gaze steady and compassionate. He knew that Karen's journey was far from over. She had survived a cardiac arrest, but she also had to confront the ugliness within herself, the prejudice that had almost cost her her life. Karen spent the next few days in the hospital, recovering both physically and emotionally. The experience had been a near-death awakening, a brutal confrontation with her own mortality and her own bigotry. She had come face to face with the consequences of her choices, the poison of her prejudice, and the fragility of her own existence. She couldn't stop thinking about Jamal, his calm strength, his unwavering professionalism, his refusal to give up on her. He had saved her life, not in spite of her prejudice, but in spite of it. He had shown her a level of compassion and humanity that she didn't think she deserved. When she was finally discharged from the hospital, Karen did something she never thought she would do. She went to Harlem General Hospital and asked to see Dr. Jamal Thompson. She found him in the emergency room, his white coat slightly rumpled, his face etched with the weariness of a long shift. He looked up in surprise as she approached, his expression guarded but polite. "Ms. Karen," he said, his voice neutral. "What can I do for you?" Karen took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times, but now that she was here, the words seemed inadequate, clumsy. I I came to thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "for saving my life. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to express how grateful I am." Jamal nodded, his expression softening slightly. "You're welcome, Ms. Karen," he said. "I'm glad you're doing well." "That's not all," Karen said, her voice stronger now. I I owe you more than just thanks. I owe you an apology for what I said at the gala. It was it was inexcusable. It was racist. And it was wrong. I was wrong." Tears welled up in her eyes and she struggled to maintain her composure. "I've been a terrible person," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've lived my life believing that I was better than everyone else, that I was entitled to special treatment, that people like you were beneath me. I was wrong, and I am so, so sorry." Jamal listened in silence, his gaze steady and unwavering. He had heard apologies before, some sincere, some less so. He could sense that Karen's was genuine, born of a profound and painful realization. "Ms. Karen," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I appreciate your apology. But the most important thing is what you do now, what you do with the rest of your life. Will you continue to be the person you were, or will you use this experience to change, to grow, to become a better person?" Karen nodded, her tears flowing freely now. "I want to change," she said, her voice filled with a desperate sincerity. "I have to change. I can't go back to being the person I was. I don't even recognize that person anymore." And she did change. It wasn't easy. It was a long and arduous journey, filled with self-doubt, setbacks, and painful self-reflection. She started by volunteering at a local community center in Harlem, working alongside people from all walks of life, listening to their stories, learning about their struggles, and confronting her own ignorance and prejudice. She also sought therapy, grappling with the deep-seated insecurities and fears that had fueled her sense of superiority and her need to control and dominate others. She realized that her racism was a symptom of a much deeper sickness, a profound lack of empathy, and a desperate need for validation. She became an advocate for social justice, using her wealth and her influence to support organizations that fought against inequality and discrimination. She even established a foundation to provide scholarships for minority students pursuing careers in medicine, hoping to help create a world where no one would ever be denied care because of the color of their skin. Years later, Karen was a different woman. She was no longer defined by her wealth or her social status, but by her humility, her compassion, and her unwavering commitment to fighting for a more just and equitable world. She never fully escaped the shadow of her past, the shame of her former self, but she used that shame as a constant reminder of the person she never wanted to be again. And she never forgot Jamal Thompson, the doctor who had saved her life, not once, but twice. He had saved her from death, and he had saved her from herself. He had shown her the true meaning of humanity, the power of compassion, and the possibility of redemption. He had taught her that even the most hardened heart can be softened, that even the deepest prejudices can be overcome, and that even the most broken soul can be healed.